Hi there, and welcome to our virtual Week 2 seminar. Here's what we're going to cover in this seminar video. First, we're going to do something that will be a standard feature of every seminar, which is to start with check-ins and reminders. Then we're going to flesh out what we mean by discourse communities. With that in place, we'll be in good shape to look more closely at the first couple of assignments in the course. And finally, we're going to circle back to what you need to do next. Okay, let's look at check-ins and reminders. First, a reminder that there is a self-directed learning piece to read each week on Desire to Learn. And you should be doing that before each week's seminar, including any knowledge checks that you run across. Second, sometime in the next week you'll be getting an email with an invite to Microsoft Teams, which we'll be using throughout the term for doing peer review. Third item here is my regular office hours. Thursdays from 12 to 2 in my WebEx room, and Fridays 10 to 12 in person at my office, which is B3321. Last but not least, your first discussion post is due this Sunday by midnight. What we're going to do here is to drill down a little deeper in our understanding of what a discourse community is. John Swales, who came up with the concept, talks about discourse communities in terms of 6 identifying characteristics. First is the idea that every discourse community has an agreed upon set of common public goals. For example, you and your fellow students have a common goal of succeeding in your courses and your program. I and your other instructors have the goal of teaching you various subjects and helping you succeed. The second characteristic of a discourse community is that it has mechanisms of communication. This simply means ways of communicating, such as email, texting, blog posts, or whatever. The third characteristic about these mechanisms being used to provide information and feedback is really just an extension of number 2. The idea here is that a discourse community doesn't just use one-way communication, but instead mechanisms that are all about opportunities for response and feedback between community members. Characteristic number 4 talks about genres of communication, which might be confusing, but genres really just means different types of texts. For instance, a report versus a blog post. In characteristic number 5, we're talking about the specialized language or jargon that each discourse community uses. Nurses have their own special vocabulary that outsiders might not understand, as do cyclists or aestheticians. Finally, a discourse community always has a balance of beginners and experts. Here's a chart mapping the characteristics of a discourse community against 2 recreational examples: a hockey team on the left and online gamers on the right. Even though these 2 activities have very little in common, when you look at them through the lens of a discourse community, you can see that they both share the same 6 characteristics as listed in the left-hand column. You can pause the video if you want to look over this chart more carefully, or you can pull it up on the PowerPoint slides I've also sent you by email. Shifting our focus from recreational activities to professions, this chart compares 2 very different professions, plumbers and police officers, by examining both from the perspective of how they function as discourse communities. You might want to map out how your future profession looks from this perspective in terms of how it uses communications. Which brings us around to how we're going to use the concept of discourse community in 2 of the assignments in this course. For your discussion posts, we're asking you to choose something you are involved with in your personal life, a hobby, a sport, anything that connects you with a discourse community. Let's say you choose to post about yoga or a volunteer activity. For each of your 4 discussion posts, we'll ask you to answer a different question about your topic and to reply to one other person. Now, we're also using the discourse community idea for your DCA, as in the right-hand column here. But for that, you're going to choose something directly related to your Fleming program to research and write about. More about this in a couple of minutes. It's okay to be a little confused at this early point in the game. Just remember that we're using the same concept of discourse community in 2 different assignments. Discussion boards are dedicated to a personal hobby or interest. The DCA is focused on a professional discourse community that is specific to your Fleming program. On the subject of the discussion boards, your first one is due this coming Sunday by midnight. Your post should be about 300 words, and you need to reply to one other student. By the way, here's the prompt or question for your first post. As you can see, we're asking you to introduce your choice of discourse community, to share why you are drawn to it, and to explain what role you play in that community. By the way, these exact instructions are also on the discussion tab on Desire to Learn. Let's look in more detail at the DCA. The first draft will be due to Microsoft Teams in time for the week 4 seminar. And by the way, we'll also be doing an orientation to Microsoft Teams in that class, if not before. Then we'll do peer review on that first draft. The second draft will be due in week 5, and the final draft in week 6. I'll let you know both of those dates as soon as I finalize them. I hope we've been clear enough by now that you can choose your topic, but it has to be directly related to your Fleming program. As a whole, this assignment is worth 20% of your grade. There are some stipulations about using sources. You'll be using at least 2 sources. One of them will be John Swales, who came up with the concept of discourse community. The other will be a source or sources that you'll cite in regard to your choice of professional discourse community. What we're going to do now is go to D2L and pull up the instructions for the DCA assignment. Here we are on the course page, and we're going to scroll down, and we're pulling up the instructions for the discourse community analysis assignment. If you have not already read these instructions for yourself, we strongly recommend that you get familiar with them as soon as possible. Here at the top, you can see we provide an introduction to what we mean by a discourse community analysis, a little bit of a rationale in terms of why we are doing this assignment, and we've got a breakdown of the specific requirements for this assignment, and a little bit of information about how the assignment will proceed in different drafts. Under this section of the instructions, we've got a step-by-step guide to doing the assignment. We've actually also broken down the assignment in terms of what we are expecting to see in each of the mandatory sections of the assignment. And by the way, these are mandatory section headings: introduction, background, research and analysis, conclusions, and recommendations. Okay, we're just going to go back to our slides here. So what you should be doing at this point is choosing a discourse community that is directly connected to your Fleming program, And as you begin doing research on that discourse community, what you want to be paying especially close attention to is anything at all related to how communication is used on the job. And here you're keeping in mind those 6 characteristics from John Swales. So what you need to do next is you need to complete your discussion post, and that's again on your choice of a hobby, a sport, something like that, by Sunday night. You also need to reply to one other person, and we'd also are advising you to begin your research for the discourse community analysis. And remember, for that you're choosing a discourse community that is directly related to your Fleming program. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll look forward to seeing you in seminar next week.